I still remember seeing Avengers Endgame in theaters for the first time. I was 15, surrounded by Marvel fans like myself. I could remember at that age I had just started to get into movies and understand them at a quote-unquote deeper level. At first, I would just go into these movies looking for crowd pops and just what my theater and the energy around me would tell me to feel. And while there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, I just was looking for something more. And now here I am 7 years later, and I feel that at 23 years old to watch this movie. I just took away a lot of different things. So I want to go ahead and talk about what I feel now, because I finally understand Avengers Endgame. When people talk about Endgame, the conversation usually starts with the biggest scenes, the portal sequence, the Captain America lifting Mjolnir sequence, and Tony Stark's final snap. And yes, those moments deserve the praise that they get, but if that's all this movie had, then nobody would still care all these years later. Huge scenes happen in blockbusters every year, but most of them fade fast nowadays. You remember them for the weekend, maybe a few months, then something louder comes along. Endgame lasted because it had emotional history behind every single payoff, and that is where the Russo Brothers deserve a lot of credit. They understood they were not just directing another Marvel movie along the conveyor belt, they were closing a chapter people had spent years growing up with, and some viewers like myself were kids when Iron Man came out, others were adults with families by the time Endgame arrived, and that challenge of making a film that could satisfy both groups is not easy. The younger audience needs spectacle, humor, and clear victories, while the older viewers were going to connect more with regret, lost time, and the fear that some mistakes cannot be undone. And the reason Endgame still works is because it makes room for both experiences. You can watch it at 15 and love the scale, and then you can revisit it and realize that the movie was carrying a lot more weight than you noticed the first time. At its core, this movie is a story about living with failure. The smartest decision the movie does is refusing to push past the loss of Infinity War so quickly. A lesser sequel would have opened with non-stop urgency, and it would race towards revenge and treat the previous ending like a temporary setback. Instead, this movie lets us sit with the damage. The opening with Hawkeye is one of my favorites of all time. Losing his family is so devastating because of how ordinary it feels. There is no grand setup and there's no warning. It's just a normal afternoon, and we get to see that as almost a fly on the wall as an audience, and that story is just shown in one scene. The same thing happens when Tony is drifting through space. Robert Downey Jr. plays those scenes with exhaustion, and it's just so captivating to watch. He still has jokes and he still sounds like himself, but underneath that you can feel someone who has nothing left in the tank. And that tone continues once the surviving Avengers unite. Nobody walks in the room ready to go get Thanos right then and there. They are frustrated, angry, and grieving. Tony and Steve do not pick up where they left off because most people don't recover from failure that cleanly. That's life. And that honesty is one of the reasons that this movie has aged so well. The characters are not treated like just big action figures being smashed together, waiting for the next set piece. They're allowed to hurt and they're allowed to mourn what just happened, like us, the audience, have been doing for the last year. Tony was always one of the most entertaining characters in the MCU, and that part never changed. But what changed for me on rewatch is understanding how much of his story in Endgame is about finding peace. Earlier versions of Tony were driven by fear. He built suits and system and backup plans because he believed disaster was always around the corner. Even his confidence usually has some anxiety underneath it, and by the time this movie catches up with him after the time jump, he finally has a thing he could never invent for himself: a real home and a family life. Morgan Stark is a huge part of why the ending lands. She's not there for just emotional decoration or a cute scene or two. She represents the life Tony never thought he would get, and he has purpose behind survival now. That makes every decision we see Tony make in this movie hit just a little harder, knowing what he has to lose, and it's often just referenced throughout the film that he has this life now that he really, really loves. When the team asks for his help, the conflict is not whether he cares enough to save the world, of course, as a given as a hero, but the conflict is whether he can risk losing the world he already saved for himself, and that is a much richer dilemma than a simple yes or no mission briefing. The movie also understands that grief can come from more than just one direction. Tony is protecting his family, but he's also carrying Peter Parker with him. The loss of Peter never really leaves this character. It quietly shapes everything and every decision that Tony has throughout this movie, and by the time Tony makes his final sacrifice, the moment works because the film showed what it would cost him, and without this groundwork in the opening, it would just be another ending. But with this, the scene carries real emotion and is why it sticks with us, the audience, for years on end. Moving on to another one of my very, very controversial takes in this movie is that Thor, he is just such a debated character, and I understand why. Some of the comedy works, Some of it pushes too far, but there are stretches where the tone around him feel just uneven to me, right? But even with that, there is a strong character idea underneath this. Thor is not just sad, he is ashamed. He had the chance to kill Thanos, and he has been told that he is the most powerful titan in the universe and that he's a god, and he couldn't kill this guy and save his universe. And then he got revenge and discovered that revenge really solved nothing, and that kind of failure could trap anybody, and it keeps replaying in your head, and it changes how you see yourself. And Chris Hemsworth is excellent whenever the script lets that side of Thor come through. You can feel the defensiveness and the ego of Thor whenever Thanos is mentioned. You can feel it in the way he avoids responsibility, and you can definitely feel it the most in the scene with his mother, which is one of my favorite scenes of the movie. That moment works because it grips his character down to something simple and relatable, a simple mother and son relationship that anybody in the audience can relate to. He doesn't need a weapon or a victory, he just needs grace, and he needs somebody to be there for him. And there is a reason that scene means more on rewatch, because it speaks to an emotion that a lot of people understand better as they get older. Disappointment in yourself, but yet finding that love in somebody else. What Joe and Anthony Russo pulled off here is harder than it sometimes gets credit for. They had to manage a massive cast, pay off years of storytelling, and still make the movie feel like a movie. That balance itself is an achievement along the other 15 years of work that this universe has had. A lot of event movies are built for the first watch. They're designed to trend and dominate the box office over the weekend and then slowly lose their grip. But Endgame was built for memory, and it's part of the reason why I'm a little worried for Doomsday, because we haven't had that groundwork laid. However, I do trust the hands and the chefs in the kitchen to make a movie that can make me feel the way Endgame makes me feel. The movie did not change at all between 2019 and now. I did. When I first watched this movie, I wanted the payoff. Now, I connect more with the recovery. I notice the scenes where characters are trying to process loss, and I appreciate the process of the pauses instead of just rushing through how these characters feel. I care more about the choices people make when there is something real on the line, just like many of you do. And I think that's one of the best compliments you can give any film, especially a superhero film like this that could at times feel otherworldly. However, you bring in great directors to bring it down and make it a more grounded, self-centered story. But those are just my thoughts on this film, guys. I had a joy rewatching this movie. I had gone in a little lower on Endgame because of just how long it's been since I've watched this film and how high I was on Infinity War and still am. But I walked out of this movie thinking that, you know what, this might be top 5 MCU for myself, and I'm so unapologetic about that. It just feels like a very complete movie that I think was made for the fans, and it absolutely did its job. So let me know in the comments below, what do you guys think about this movie? I would love to hear what you guys think about Endgame this many years later. Let me know all that and more, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.